And we are on air.
Hi guys, my name's Brianna and today we're going to be having a chat about Out of Love by Hazel Hayes. So let's get right into the video. Okay, so Hazel Hayes makes videos on YouTube and I have been following her for quite a long time, and she does a lot of screenwriting. Basically, she's a writer and I just really love her. So when she came out with an actual fully a book, I was so excited. I pre-ordered it, so I had gotten it exactly when it came out. I got it right away. I read it right away, but the reason I didn't film this video and edit and post it right away, there's a couple reasons. Number one, the story itself is written backwards. So it is a love story where the first chapter is when they are broken up and the last chapter is the day they met. Really interesting. And so the author herself, Hazel Hayes, said that theoretically the book should function whereas you can read the last chapter first and so on and so forth, all the chapters in the backwards order, and it should read also like a normal book, whereas they meet in the first chapter, they are broken up in the last chapter. So the story theoretically works in both directions. So before I made this video, I wanted to read it a second time backwards, so that way I could speak on how it flows in both ways. Now, I don't know why, but I read quite a few books before I came back to this to read it backwards, so that's why it took me so long to get to this video. But here we are, and it was a beautiful story. It was so good. I loved it so much. It hit me so well, and it is beautifully written, and it could easily become my new favorite book. But I'm not going to quite push the envelope and say that yet until I've read it a few more times, because I didn't decide my favorite book was my favorite book until I had read it 5 times. So I do want to read it at least 1 or 2 more times before I actually decide if it's my favorite book or not, but it was really good. So now is my time for a disclaimer. The rest of this video will be including spoilers, so if you have not read the book, please go read the book first and then come back to this video. But yeah, let's start jumping into it. So first thing that I love off the bat is how it's actually laid out. Each chapter is relatively long, and theoretically Hazel says that you should be able to read each chapter individually and it should be its own complete story. Each chapter is a short story that you could read without the context of the rest of the book and it should still hold its own. Obviously all the short stories flow together to show a big overall story of 2 characters that fell out of love. So it's really interesting how they're all individual stories, but yet they all come together. It's really good. The next thing that I really love about it is how, I don't know what the right word is, but the word that's coming to mind is permeable. I don't think that really makes sense. How permeable the characters are. The characters are well thought out characters, but at the same time, they're not so specific that you can't apply them to people in your life. That's the thing to me that makes this book so spectacular, is you can so easily fall into it and fall into relating to it, whether it's the relationship she had with her mother or the relationship she had with her friends, or there's so many different things going on in this book that you can find yourself falling into something within it, and it's just so beautiful and raw. Another thing is the fact that when you start the book, like I said, the first chapter they are broken up, so it's the realest love story I've ever read, because it's not a love story. You feel the love in certain chapters in the book, but then you also feel the toxicity and them falling away from each other, and it's really interesting. So this is the biggest thing for me. When I read it forwards, so breakup to meeting, the way the book is properly written, I loved it. I loved it on my first read. I did. Beautiful writing, the story was well thought out, it hit me in many different parts, but I did not cry because it felt more positive, because it was getting better as the story was going on. The relationship was improving as the story was going on. So the last chapter and seeing them so happy together, it did strike a nerve, because it's well, I know they're not going to last. But it also felt so good to see something go from bad to good instead of good to bad for once. Whereas when I read the story backwards, just as beautiful, very good. It made me cry reading it backwards because it felt like something bad was happening. It felt good to bad, you read them slowly break apart from one another. So that I thought was really interesting because I genuinely thought I was going to cry the first time I read it, but I've never read a book like this before. And it hit me in a very different way than I'm used to because I knew the outcome. Like, I knew they were going to break up from the beginning. And the thing is, yeah, when I read it backwards, I still knew the outcome, but instead of watching them slowly fall together, I was watching them slowly fall apart, and that somehow stung more. Whereas I'm so happy she wrote it the way she did. It's very unique. I love reading it as the end of a relationship to the beginning of a relationship. But reading it backwards felt more like a classic love story, and it hit me in the way a classic love story does. Whereas reading it the way it was meant to be read was such a new experience, and I loved it immensely, but it just hit me very, very differently, if that makes sense. Now, however, although the story does make sense being read from the beginning of the relationship to the end, or from the end of the book to the beginning, there was like a couple things that just like didn't quite make sense when you were reading it backwards. So like, for example, characters would get introduced in the book in the beginning or the end of the relationship, but when you read it backwards, you already knew those characters, so like things would just be worded ever so slightly strangely for it to be backwards. So like, for example, there's a chapter in the middle of the book where she goes to Paris, and that's a whole chapter where the main character goes to Paris to see her boyfriend, and like it's a whole thing. Then the chapter right before it, or if you're reading it backwards, the next chapter says, I went for a week to Paris, or something along those lines. And it's like, if you're reading it backwards, it's like, oh well, I already know that. But if you're reading it forwards, that's new information, and the flow makes sense. So it's like, although the overall storyline going backwards flowed perfectly, and generally it was flowing very well chapter to chapter, there was just a couple instances where I said, well, if the book was meant to be read in this direction, it wouldn't say it that way, but it wasn't, it didn't really have any continuity errors. So I did think that was very interesting for a book that, like, for reading a book the opposite way it's intended to be read. It was phenomenal how well it flowed backwards. I think that's remarkable. I want to eventually like start picking at it and reading a random chapter at a time to see how I really feel and how it fits with me on each chapter on their own. If that holds true and every chapter can be read on, which it very likely seems like that, but when you're reading a book altogether, it's hard to get a feel of that. But it very much seems like every chapter can hold its own, and then it can be read forwards and it can be read backwards. That is beyond unique. I have never heard or seen of any other book that does anything even slightly similar, and Hazel's just so beyond talented. Like, it blows my mind. Another thing that I've loved about reading this book is the writing was so amazing, and the fact that the main character is a writer, it inspired me greatly to write. If you guys watch my videos, you will know that I've said in a couple videos that like I want to write a book one day and blah blah blah, and like every New Year's I make some resolution to work on my book, but then that feels like too much pressure, so I never do it and I never write anything. I wouldn't say I've written for my book, but I have written many, like, I guess short stories you would call them, since I've read this, because both times I've read this, in the middle of it I have stopped to write things and things like that, and it has inspired me a lot, this book. Like, just reading one single chapter makes me like get the itch to write something, and I just love that. I love when something you enjoy can make you also want to do something else you enjoy. It's just it's just so amazing. Now, I know I'm speaking about the book in very vague terms right now. I'm going to get into the more minutiae of it, get into the characters, what I like about each character in the storyline, and things like that. But I just wanted to address first overall how incredible it is, just how the book works. And like, I will forever be blown away that this can be read in any order. It's just, that shows so much talent. And I highly, highly, highly doubt that Hazel is watching this video. But Hazel, if you happen to be watching this video, you are incredibly talented. I am blown away. I would love to speak to you, collaborate with you, do an interview with you, something, literally anything, because you are beyond talented, and I would love to like just peek more into your mind and how you were able to do this, and just but that's never gonna happen. But if it would ever potentially happen, oh my god, you're so talented. Like, I cannot even fathom it. Okay, let me start with my favorite chapter. My favorite chapter, I knew going in what it was going to be about, because Hazel did a live stream with Jody. It wasn't a live stream, I think it was a video. Well, it was a live stream, but she also filmed it and made it a video. I could be forgetting. I watched that video or live stream or whatever of them talking about the book before I received my copy of the book in the mail. So Summer Skin, my favorite chapter, is an LGBTQ plus chapter. So going into it, I knew that. So I was expecting to like it a lot because I love when there's representation like that. But I wasn't expecting to love it so much. And I didn't necessarily know it would be my favorite chapter or anything like that. I kind of just went into it not really knowing what to expect because the book itself, yes, it is like the main character, she's bisexual. By the way, the main character does not have a name, which is also something I absolutely love about this book, like how you can write something without a character having a name. So the character has a nickname, Angel, and the character's only referred by that name, that nickname, throughout the book, but never by their actual name. So we don't know their actual name. So Angel is bisexual, but it's not super prevalent throughout the whole book. There's only 2 chapters in the book where it's really an important topic that the character is bisexual. So I wasn't really sure what to expect going into it knowing there was going to be a chapter that had to do with that. Because I was like, but the book itself as a whole isn't really an LGBTQ plus book. It's definitely, the main character is bisexual, but she's in a quote-unquote straight relationship. It's about a male and a female falling out of love. So I didn't know what to expect. But that chapter really hit me. And the thing is, I am bisexual. So of course, anytime there's a bisexual character, it's going to relate to me by twofolds. But reading that chapter, it was just so beautiful and I just love it so much. And I don't want to get into the minutia of that chapter because if you haven't read the book, because I know despite the spoiler alert in the beginning, people watch these videos without reading the book. That chapter is so beautiful that I don't want to spoil it, but to give you a general idea, the main character meets this girl and they spend one day together and they don't do anything. She doesn't cheat on her boyfriend or anything like that, but it's just so beautiful and it's like a safe place for her. Lena is just such a safe space for Angel, and it's just, I just love it. And one thing I do want to point out about that chapter that I loved so much, this is not why it's my favorite chapter, it's kind of unrelated to everything else about the chapter, but there's this part of it where Angel is writing her, or signing off her name on a piece of paper, and we don't know what Angel's real name is. And Lena says, "You have a beautiful name." And that really, it's just like Hazel, like the author writing it, knows that we don't know Angel's name, and that's just like such a it just shows the attention to detail that authors put into their book, because that is such a small thing, but because we don't know the name of the character, it's such a big thing, and like I just loved that. I love that part so much. Okay, we're gonna move on from that chapter though, because like I said, I don't want to give away too much of it because it was a really beautiful chapter, and I encourage you, even if you're not going to read the whole book, read that chapter. It's beautiful. Like, go to your local library, find out if they have the book, rent it, read that chapter, because it's beautiful. Also read the whole book and buy it because Hazel is amazing. This book is amazing. But if you're not much of a reader and you're not going to read the whole book, read that chapter. It is so beautiful. It just hits me in the heart. It really hits me in the heart. But moving on, while we're on the topic of LGBTQ+, there is one other section of the book where it is relevant that the main character is bisexual. So, when Angel is in Paris to surprise Theo happens to be busy, and then one night they were supposed to go to dinner and Theo cancels, so Angel decides to call an old friend who lives in Paris and go meet up with him. While out with him, she meets a girl. I'm blanking on her name. Claudine. Her name's Claudine. Claudine speaks only French, and Angel doesn't speak French at all, only English. So it's a weird dynamic right off the bat. And Angel is drunk and whatever. Angel messages Theo, joking around, but it's Angel asking for permission in Angel's drunken state, and Theo doesn't see it that way. Angel gets with Claudine and then brings Claudine back to the hotel to have a threesome. And This is the part of the book that struck me a lot because I've never personally experienced this, but it is a very common thing in the LGBTQ plus community, and it's sad that this is a thing, but this is what happens. So she brings Claudine to the hotel room, they all kiss, and then it's awkward for a bit because Theo realizes what's happening, doesn't really want to do this, and whatever. So Claudine leaves, and then Theo and Angel have their own time, and Theo asks Angel to describe her experience with Claudine so he can get off to it. And then the next day, throws a fit saying, you couldn't do that, you cheated on me, this, and that. And yes, Angel should not have done that. But people so often will go and fetishize people's sexualities and then go and get mad about them the next day. And that's exactly what happened in this. Theo wanted to hear about Angel's experience so that he could fetishize it and get off on it. But then the next day he was mad that she had that experience. So it was only a good thing when it was beneficial to him. And I think that it was all so well written because it really showed like what people of different sexualities have to go through. And it's so messed up that people have to go through that. And the thing that I really liked a lot is we hear a lot about this story through Angel describing it to her best friend Maya. I love the character of Maya, but we're going to get into that in a minute. Angel tells Maya the story, and Maya's response is basically, it's such a muddy situation that no one is necessarily wrong. Because Angel shouldn't have done that, but Theo shouldn't have reacted in the ways that he reacted, and it's such a muddy situation. So it really showed how complex situations can get when you have people who are treating your sexuality in the ways that they treat it. So I thought it was really interesting and fascinating, and I love the way that Hazel wrote it, because that part of the story was not told as its own chapter. It was told as Angel telling the story to Maya instead of it being its own story, which I thought was really interesting because then we got to see Maya's perspective on it all and see that relationship, see Angel confiding in Maya and see Maya being an incredible friend. I thought it was just beautiful. Now Maya, the character of Maya, is the best friend you could ever have. And any friends that you have in life, there are ways that you'll be able to find them to relate to these characters. And it's just so beautiful how easily these characters can be transferred to real life. And there's other friendship characters as well. There's Darren as well, who's more of the low-key friend. He was more of Theo's friend than Angel's, but he was there, he cared, and he didn't always say the right things, but he cared, and that was obvious. There was that type of friend as well. And just these characters, they're all so well thought out. Not one character is just like another. They're all so unique and well thought out, but also there's a character for everything that you could so easily relate in some way this book to your life. There's the good mother-daughter relationship, but that also shows that there was bad parts of the relationship when she was much younger. And this book also tackles so many really big themes. I already talked about LGBTQ+, but it also talks about trauma and therapy. The main character sees 2 different therapists during this book, and abuse and divorce and long-distance relationships and sex and friendships and motherhood and love. And there's just so many major topics in here, and it's so beautiful. It's the type of book that no one else is gonna agree with me on this because I'm a weird child who likes doing schoolwork. This is the type of book that makes me want to dissect it, rip apart each theme that's present in the book and dive into the nitty-gritty of how those themes are applied and the way the author wrote about it and tied it in throughout the whole story. And literally, this book is so beautiful that I could easily end up making a whole series on each theme of the book. I probably won't do that because I feel like that would not be very entertaining for you guys. And I'm not an English teacher, so I will probably never do that. But I easily easily could. And if you guys would like me to do maybe a couple videos diving further into like specific chapters, maybe that would be interesting, because I know in these videos I do get into certain specifics, but I am pretty broad because it's hard to talk about a whole book in one video. But I love this book so much, and it's so hard to discuss it without going into all the minutiae of how each themes are applied and whatnot. But oh, and the titles of the chapters. So what I had to do to read the book backwards, because I didn't want to accidentally make any mistakes, is I wrote a list of all the chapters on my phone, so that way every time I was gonna sit down and read a chapter, I could find the next to last chapter and keep going. So the chapters are called Muscle Memory, Pissing on Sticks, The Last Good Day, Bodies, this is in French, I'm not going to say it correctly, but I'm going to try, please don't make fun of me. La Petite Morte, Knowing Part 2, Summer Skin, Splinter, Canadian Geese, Knowing Part 1, Are You a Banana, This Charming Man, and 12 Pubs and Coppers. Which, okay, Are You a Banana? That chapter is mostly about the therapist, and oh boy, I love the way the therapist is depicted in this book, and like how the therapist handles things. And it's a very good therapist that this character has, and if this therapist is based off a particular therapist, that therapist is a very good therapist. I loved the way that relationship was depicted and described, because Hazel, the author, made it very obvious that therapy is not a one-time go. It takes a lot of hard work, but that therapist, the reason why you need a therapist as opposed to a friend and blah blah blah, they really very well portrayed the relationship between a patient and a therapist. And I loved it. My camera stopped recording, but we'll keep going. So I was talking about the therapist, and the thing that I love the most is in the beginning of the book or the end of the love story, which way you read it. The main character, Angel, gets another therapist following her first therapist's opinion because she moved, so she didn't have that same therapist anymore. And I love how they really showed that mental health is not linear. That's another great theme that they had in the book, mental health, because they talk about the main character's depression and anxiety and struggles with trauma and whatnot. And like that was just really great. Hi Dusty, pretty girl. Like mental health is sometimes spoken about in books, but it's often spoken about in the wrong ways and portrays the wrong messages. I feel like Hazel did a very good job at speaking about mental health in such a positive way, in that it really showed what it's like. Obviously, mental health is very important, and it can be something that's very difficult to deal with. Hazel did a remarkable job of showing what it's actually like, talking about how mental health isn't linear. You don't just get better. You can have regressions and relapses, and I really loved that. And the book was just so good. Another thing that's interesting is, even though the book is going from the end of the story to the beginning of the story, within each chapter even there are flashbacks. So it really is just remarkable that you can read the story and follow along so easily, because it is written timeline-wise insanely. I can read this book and understand what's happening, but I can't even imagine the first step to going about how to write this, like coming up with this. It's so interwoven in so many ways, and the timeline is so strange that it's remarkable. Incredible writing. But yeah, I don't know, I have so much I could speak on about this book. Like I said, I don't know, let me know if you guys would be interested in maybe me delving into specific chapters or something like that. But I think that's where I'm gonna stop for now. I love this book. Please read it if you have read it. Let me know in the comments down below so we can start a conversation about it. But for now, that's it for today's video. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Mwah!